Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joe Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge. A few days ago, I read a tweet that I thought was brilliant, which is kind of amazing to do because tweets only have 280 characters. And I retweeted it. It's from a person's handle called Feta Shervu. And they said, the 4 thieves of productivity are 1, not saying no, 2, poor brain chemistry, 3, tortured relationships, 4, environments that don't support your goals. And then they simply said self-audit, fix one thing at a time. And it's just a really simple little tweet, but it sparked this whole conversation in my mind about how these are the things that underpin, they have it written in the negative, the thieves of productivity. But I thought these 4 things could easily be talked about as, in their counter and their reverse, as the underpinnings of satisfaction and health.
Yeah.
Mental, emotional, business, whatever health. So what we wanted to do is have a little conversation around what came up for us as we were discussing why are these the thieves of productivity, and what are some of the ways that we can approach this that really put the onus on us as individuals to ensure that we're doing as much as we can to keep our systems clean, the systems of ourselves. These are all nodes in the system, and how do we make it so that these systems are running as well as they can so that we have the desired emergent?
In our culture, productivity is the metric that we're all striving for, or at least told that we're supposed to be striving for. And I think that most people, and you listening probably also, struggle with being productive. And not because necessarily you're lazy or you can't actually accomplish things. I think there's a lot of things going on in our lives. We all have our personal life, our professional life, our relational life, whether it's dating and attraction or just friendship circles. We have extra things we have to do. At the time of this recording, the world's been a little bit of a chaos experience, and so there's extra things people have to do and extra paperwork and extra measures they have to take. So there's a lot going on that can pull us away from productivity. And I don't think that we're suggesting that productivity is the end of the human experience. A personality hacker, we want you to know yourself intimately and know about others so you can create a really joyful life. And productivity does come into play at certain times. So I just want to make a comment that we need to put productivity in its proper place. It is one aspect of your life. It is not your entire life. And some of us, depending on our personality types, are wired naturally to understand and know how to be more productive than other personality types. I think we believe that all personality types can be productive in their life. And some have a little bit, they can make lists and get things done more than others. And they know how to not multitask and focus. And I think there's a struggle in our modern world for all of us to do the things we need to do. And so productivity is a topic that's important to talk about. It's just not the end-all, be-all of everyone.
Yeah, and you don't even have to, I think, necessarily associate or attach it to achievement in like productivity and getting a bunch of things marked off of a to-do list. I think you could also call it fruitage, right? Productivity, or the fruits of our labors, which the fruit that we produce is a reflection of how healthy we are as the thing that produced it, right? Productivity comes from the word produce. Produce is also trees produce fruit. So you could call it fruitage. And fruitage can show up in all sorts of areas of our lives. It can be, a reflection of the health of our relationships, or it can be a reflection of our own growth and development work. It could be our general sense of satisfaction or happiness or joy. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, about accomplishing specific goals. What was interesting is when you and I were talking about this list, these 4 things, not saying no, poor brain chemistry, tortured relationships, and environments that don't support your goals, we were saying you could almost see it, if you mix the list up a little bit, you could see it as layers of establishing things, establishing elements that live on top of each other. And so you and I kind of worded it a little bit differently. As opposed to having the negative connotation of a thief of productivity or a thief of productivity, we thought about it more as like, what would create the fruitage we desire? And what list would we go with that? And it wasn't a hierarchical list based on what we think is most important, it ended up being a list of what does one need to establish first before really addressing the next thing.
Yeah, I think the first thing on this list that comes up is poor brain chemistry. And when I think of that in the positive, I think of a balance, a body-mind balance in all of our lives. We're not just living in our head. We're not just living in our bodies. We have a good balance between these two worlds. In fact, our mind is all over our body anyway. It's in the stomach. It's in the heart. We have neurons there. And we carry memories in our physicality. We carry emotions in our bodies. And so understanding that and being able to work with the body-mind systems, I think, is a baseline for a happy, joyful, productive life. And I think that's really the first point of entry. Is the second item on that list is good brain chemistry, good body-mind connection and practices.
Yeah, that comes back to us as an instrument. Like, we're the source of everything. We're the source of our experience in the world. And so the better our brain chemistry is, the better our interpretations of the realities that we're experiencing or what our personal realities are. It's hard to stay up when you have a chemical imbalance that keeps you depressed or keeps you in a mode that you can't really, maybe you're sluggish, maybe you can't think clearly. Maybe you're having difficulty, processing emotions because there's this other thing that's distracting you or always sort of pulling you out of focus.
Yeah.
And this idea, and what's interesting is that whenever we talk about brain chemistry, it feels almost like a touchy subject for a lot of people.
Yeah.
It feels like something where you're not supposed to talk about people's brain chemistry or what poor or good brain chemistry is because you don't know their situation or you don't know what they've been through.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's something that we shouldn't have as a touchy subject, honestly. I don't think it should be off limits. I think maybe it should be reframed in a way where we understand that everybody has something different they're working with. They have different circumstances and situations and make an accounting for that. But I think what ends up happening is people feel judged for wherever they're at.
Yeah.
If you remove judgment and simply talk about as individuals, and we're some of the only people who really know what's going on for us, if we can improve wherever we're currently at, because improvements can always be made no matter who you are or where you're at, if we improve whatever our subjective experience is, whatever our individual situation is, and look at it through that lens, and it's not about others' judgment, it's about self-auditing, as the tweet recommended. You self-audit wherever you're at. Self-audit what poor brain chemistry means to you and what better brain chemistry would mean.
There's this funny, you showed it to me, it was on YouTube or TikTok, maybe Twitter, I don't remember, but it was this guy singing this song about why am I so stressed out with anxiety all the time. And he's like, I get like at least 2 or 3 hours of sleep a night. It's a funny song he's singing, right? And like I drink tons of caffeine and alcohol and smoke marijuana and all this stuff, but I'm stressed out all the time. Why is this? I'm so anxious. What's going on here? It's a funny spoof of all the things he's doing that are probably leading to his anxiety or he's not doing, like getting rest. And he's confused why he's so anxious and upset all the time. And it's funny, but also I think that's what you're suggesting, Antonia, is self-audit. We're born with hardware, we're born with the brain chemistry we're born with, but are there things we're doing in our lives that are certainly helping or harming us? And you're the only one that can determine that. It's your life and your body mind. You have to be the one to self-audit and really check in with yourself. I have to do that for myself, and you have to do that for yourself, Antonia. But I think that's what you're suggesting.
Yeah, I saw another conversation online one time where a person said, if you do these list of things, you'll be in a much better situation. And they talked about getting good sleep every night, like having good sleep hygiene and having a clean diet. A clean diet would be something that's filled with, nutrient dense ingredients and, avoiding things like alcohol and avoiding things, that would
sugar, caffeine.
Yeah, exactly. Sugar, caffeine. And getting into nature on a regular basis and getting out into the sun and getting vitamin D. And they just listed this it was a pretty reasonable list. Oh my gosh, the person got absolutely dogpiled and made,
because they're being reasonable?
Probably. But the accusation was like, well, I can't do those things because of where I'm at, right? Well,
that might be true for some people.
My brain chemistry doesn't make it so that I can sleep all night. And it's like, okay, well, but can you eat clean? And are you doing all of that? Like, what can you take personal responsibility for? So I think when I read something like having poor brain chemistry robs you of your productivity, and the idea that good brain chemistry will give you much better fruitage, The idea is not to judge somebody for whatever's going on for them, but to take an honest self-assessment to go, where can I improve? What can I be doing better? And there is a lot of information online that will encourage you to continue your poor habits in order to not, well, it's called crabs in a bucket. Crabs in a bucket is this idea that when a whole bunch of crabs are in a bucket, when one tries to crawl out, the other crabs pull them back into the bucket. And I don't know what's going on with the crabs themselves, but it is a phenomena that happens. So the internet will encourage crabs in a bucket mentality. It will encourage poor habits in order for other people to be able to justify their own poor habits. And so when one is doing an honest self-assessment, they have to ask themselves, am I feeling judged by others because I'm actually judging myself and I know I should be changing, but that's just more than I want to do. Right? Like, am I really honestly getting a proper amount of exercise? And not just movement, not just walking around, not just doing little things, but like actually breaking a sweat, actually living a lifestyle that would reflect how we've been living for hundreds of thousands of years, which is low calories for the most part. We didn't usually have as an abundance of calories as we do in, say, the West and our diets in the West, combined with a lot of strenuous exercise, lots of running, jumping, basically doing things that required carrying heavy items from place to place, and made good use of our muscles and our body. Are we doing the things that our ancestors have been doing for hundreds of thousands of years, but we live in a synthetic environment that doesn't encourage that kind of movement because we don't have to? We can just sit and binge watch shows and on a really comfy couch that's designed ergonomically to make it so that we never want to move while mindlessly eating snacks. Our life totally allows us to do that, but our lifestyle didn't allow us to do that for 200,000 years. So maybe that's not natural. So what are the things that we can self-assess to go, I maybe should be judging myself, not harshly, not in a way that makes me feel like I'm not a good person, not the quality of my character, not whether or not I'm lazy or whether or not I'm a bad person or whatever, but am I getting the emergence that I want? Am I acting and behaving in a way that will get the results that I want? And so good brain chemistry means that we have to be honest with ourselves and go, no, my sleep hygiene sucks. I really need to be going to bed earlier. I need to be maybe turning off anything with a backlight, shutting it down for maybe at least an hour or two before I go to bed. I need to not be eating late in the day so that I don't have all these things that will disrupt my sleep and digestion. Maybe I need to be drinking more water. Maybe I need to be getting out into light and nature more often, doing things like forest bathing. Maybe there's a whole list of things that I could be doing to optimize my experience, and they're really simple, but I'm resisting them because they mean a lifestyle change. They're not just something I can one and done. They're not a magic pill. There's something that I need to actually weave into, just as a baseline of good habits in my life. And then I can add to that things like, body stretching, like things like body-mind practices that you mentioned, yoga, meditation, other things that are moments to get present, moments to be away from the noise of the world, away from all of the chaotic voices, whether those voices in text through social media or whether they're like through YouTube or just the voices that infiltrate our thoughts all the time, a place to calm them all down and get really present to the moment. Doing all of these things, pretty much like literally every journal anywhere with, that isn't pandering to an audience that wants to believe something in order to justify a lifestyle. Most journals that are medical journals will tell you that these are basic things that will very much help a person get through their life experience. Even stuff like, I think recently, there was like an article that came out that mindfulness doesn't help people. It doesn't actually decrease stress. But the I don't know if it was a study that had an article that had bias, but basically the study didn't go far enough because what happened is when people got mindful and they got present, their emotional processing work started coming up for them.
They got more stressful.
Right, because they had work they had to do and that had gone like cans that had been kicked down the road. And so what mindfulness did is it showed them the emotional processing work that they needed to do. They were doing body-mind practices, and now all of the stuff that was bottlenecked was starting to show up for them. So in that moment, it didn't decrease their stress because they had stress they needed to process. And so that was coming up for them. But then studies that show that when a person uses that mindfulness to address those things and then gets through them and processes them, on the other side, the stress just absolutely drops, right? Like you're in so much better of a position to deal with the anxieties and stresses of life. So really, these self-audits need to come with a big part of honesty with oneself, intellectual and emotional honesty, an ability to be vulnerable with the self, an ability to acknowledge the need for improvements without doing crippling self-judgment. Like, know that if you don't have all of your shit together when it comes to all these things, that doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means that you maybe need to address one of these things and work on it one thing at a time. One thing at a time. I'm going to drink more water. That's the thing I'm going to work on for the next 21 days. I'm going to be drinking more water, and I'm going to be, making sure that I stay hydrated, because that's like a basic thing that will help my joints. It will help my overall tiredness. It's like a really important thing. Then once I'm done with that, then I'm going to move on to the next thing that's really important. Maybe I start exercising every week, or maybe I cut my calories a little bit per day, or maybe I just eat higher quality foods, right? So I feel more sated. I get the nutrients in my body that I need, and so I get more sated. Maybe I focus on my sleep, and I'm going to sleep through the night. But whatever it is, all of these things are more conducive to brain chemistry. And when your chemistry is balanced, you feel like you can handle things so much more. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody is neurotypical. It doesn't mean that everybody's had the same amount of, things that they need to focus on. Dealing with brain chemistry could mean going to a therapist and dealing with some traumas that you've experienced in the past. I mean, this is a huge, huge, huge subject. And just not doing it, right? Just going like, well, that's just not something that I need to do, or I'm just never going to be as healthy as somebody else, or, like you're somehow disqualified from needing to focus on these things because it's never going to be the pink of perfection or whatever. I think that that's really undercutting how much that's robbing an individual of both productivity and just fruitage, like the good positive fruitage that can come from taking care of yourself. So that would be the foundational aspect. That would be the very first layer, is addressing the self and realizing that all of your good or bad habits, or whatever habits that you have, are the things that are directly relating to your mind's chemistry.
The next item that you had thrown out on that list that stood out to me as the next foundation. So it's not in the same order that you read them, but the last point, which is environment that doesn't support your goals, will rob you of productivity. And so an environment that does support your goals or support your productivity is a good thing. We're actually doing some work very soon. A very large tech company reached out to us and invited us to come talk to, I think, at least 1,000 of their introverts at this tech company, because at the time of this recording, they're getting ready to re-enter the workforce and have to go to their office environments. And so we were talking to them about what it will look like to speak to some of the introverts in their company. And they were talking about the environment they're going into is a corporate environment that is one, like, it's obviously all over the world, but most of the environments they're going to is one giant room where people come into, and they have to basically get there early in the morning to find a workstation. If they get there too late, they're just kind of on their own. They've got to find a random place in the space to work. If they have to make a phone call, they have to reserve like a small area to go into this private room to make a phone call. As they were describing this, it sounded like a very challenging environment to work in. I was thinking about this. I was like, even as an extrovert, and I'm not going into all the details, but because I don't need to basically get the point across, the environment that these people are going to go back to is very challenging. I would be very challenged in this. And I'm thinking about the ergonomic design of your workspace, your life space, the environment that you work and play in and do life in. It actually matters, like where you live and how you set up your living space, where you work, how you set up your workspace. All of those things play to your strengths or play to your weaknesses in the environment around you. And your personality type will come into play here. If you're an introvert, you might need a little bit of a different work and living space than an extrovert would. And so take into account, self-audit the environments that you're in. And sometimes we just have to be environments that aren't ideal, maybe for a job reason. Like, I don't think that this company we're talking to, they get a choice in the matter. They just have to be in this environment. So we're going to talk to them about some strategies on how to deal with this and how to be okay with it and work through. And we're going to probably talk about a lot of things we're talking about on this show, We're going to talk about body-mind practices. We're going to talk about the environmental setup that you have around you. And so I think you can take a self-audit in your life and say, okay, where are the areas that I have influence over in the environment? And how can I make it more ergonomic to how I'm wired as a person, my personality type, and the ways that I perform the best? What can I do to influence that environment for the better? And there are probably some small things you can do, and maybe even large things you can do right now to take the lead in your own life. And then if something is just untenable, that is a big thing that you can't change, well, maybe you need to readdress the bigger thing now. Maybe it's a career change or a job change or a different city or living environment, a different space you have to live in. There are options for you that you might be longer term, 6 months to a year to work on. But having an idea of the best environment for how you're wired, I think, is extremely important.
Yeah, I think this is where an understanding of type can be so helpful, is in creating an environment that's ergonomic to your type. And you can just look at it through the lens of the dichotomies. Just that alone can be a game changer. So knowing whether or not you're an introvert or an extrovert can help you give yourself permission to have more space away from others, maybe more downtime, more introverted time if you're an introvert and you're not giving yourself that. Or if you're an extrovert, giving yourself permission to be more social, or maybe even just get out into the outside world and explore it. These things are sometimes very discrete needs that we don't give ourselves permission for if people in our lives haven't told us that we're allowed to do that. And so giving yourself permission to be in the space or create the space that you need to, I mean, maybe you're an extrovert but a highly sensitive person and you need to create an environment that doesn't give maybe too much noise pollution. That's a thing. And if that's something that's coming up for you as a need, then honor it. Honor what you feel are the things that are necessary for you as an individual to be able to feel like your environment is a little more tailored. Now, if you're in partnerships or you have a whole family and there's a whole bunch of needs represented, then there might be some compromise required, or there might be some accommodation to factors outside of your control. Not everybody can quit a job that they don't particularly like. Not everybody can pick up and move. Not everybody can have the level of quiet that they would like if they maybe have a large family. And not everybody has the permission or the ability to create maybe a social network that they would like to as quickly as they would like to. So whatever it is that your need is, like, that might not be something that happens overnight. It might be something that you have to make some concessions around. But get as much of the need met as you can, right? Like, carve space out. Give yourself permission to take what you need in order to be at a baseline of health. If you're an intuitive, make sure that you're getting enough intuitive conversation. If you're a sensor, make sure that you're getting enough to feed your senses and make you feel grounded. And if you're a thinker, make sure you're not around too much drama. Make sure that there's not too much emotional demand placed on you. If you're a feeler, making sure that you feel good about your relationships and that you're in a place and a position to be able to honor your own emotional health and the health of others around you. Judgers and perceivers, giving yourself permission to carve out, or not carve out, rather, create an environment that allows you to feel like you have some control over it as a judger. And for a perceiver, giving yourself permission to have some spontaneity and some improvisational space. And then if you go into cognitive functions for your type, you'll see all sorts of things that are a lot more targeted towards the needs that you have as your personality type. So it's a matter of understanding what it is you need and giving yourself permission to get that need met as much as possible, even if you have to make concessions with others or meet people, halfway. Getting the need met, at least, we don't always get a banquet all the time, but we need to get our caloric intake every day and our nutrients every day for eating, right? Like, it's not like we get to have whatever we want to eat whenever we want to eat it every day. That's not possible for most people. And we have a certain amount of calories we need to consume every day, and we have a certain amount of nutrients to consume every day to be at a baseline of health. So take that same principle and move it to your environment. What's your baseline? What are the baseline needs that you have in order to survive that day? Or not even survive, but just to be healthy. Figure out what those needs are and then start making movements to create a space that helps you get those needs met every day.
We had, as an example of this, we had an experience where in the early days of our podcast, every time we wanted to record, we had to go and choose one of the bedrooms in the house we were renting, one of the kids' bedrooms, go in, soundproof it, set up the microphones, set up all the recording equipment, record, tear everything down, put it all back away, and de-soundproof the room. And that was exhausting. And it was definitely robbing us of productivity. So real tangible things, like we rented an extra space and set up a permanent audio recording studio with soundproof walls that we can walk into anytime. It's already set up and we can record. It revolutionized our lives. We ergonomically set up our environment to do the task at hand. Probably you're listening along going, yeah, no duh, Joel. Like that's like setup 101. But as our personality types, ENPs, ENTP, ENFP, we had a mistaken thought that, we can just create the infrastructure every time we need it. We don't have to have it more set up, right? And on a timeline that's reliable. We'll just be free form and set it up when we need it. Well, that works often, but man, it certainly burns a lot of energy. And so we learned over time that yes, our personality types can do that. But is that the best way to set up our environment? Just because we can do it that way, is that ergonomically designed for our productivity? And certainly it's not. It's to have some more stability in our production. And I think our production quality and our ability to be chilled, like energetically and stuff got better because we have a permanent space now.
I sometimes forget the early days and how it was set up.
One was recorded in our car on the road, I remember.
I think we even copped to that one, didn't we?
Yeah, I think so.
We were like, we're in our car.
We will be right back. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker. Now back to the show. So moving on to the next point then, I think, over to tortured relationships, because I think this is the next piece. Because tortured relationships are really the people we let into our lives. This is, before we get to the last point, which is saying no, which I think is related to boundaries. Well, before you even have good boundaries with the people that you're in your life, who are those people going to be in the first place? And I can't tell you how many people in my life personally are crazy makers. Often they're family or friends, so I don't want to get rid of them. But they are challenging because crazy makers tend to come into your life and need your attention at very inopportune times, and sometimes demand that attention at inopportune times. If you have children, they would fall into the category of crazy makers because you might have plans next Tuesday and then something happens with one of your children and those plans are out the window. And so they crazy make your life because they can disrupt things that are happening because of the needs they present. And again, some personality types are more responsive to crazy makers in their life. They tend to create systems of human interaction with more and more crazy makers. Other people are better at keeping them at arm's length. But I think that's something we can do a self-assessment with. The crazy makers in your life, or just all the relationships in your life, which ones are crazy makers and which ones aren't? Which relationships support you, your productivity, your goals, your joyfulness, your essence, your personhood, and which ones tend to disrupt all the things that you want in life and the joyfulness you have. And sometimes the trade-off is worth it. Sometimes there's crazy makers. It's like, I love this person. Maybe it's your spouse, your partner, who knows, a child of yours. And you're like, of course, I'm not going to cut them out of my life. But man, they're so frustrating. Just knowing who's a crazy maker, who's not, can be a quick little short list to make in your mind or even on a piece of paper just to get a sense of, wow, okay, I got a lot of people that are crazy making in my life. I've got 2 people that are super supportive and stable. But look at this list of 15 other people. Wow, maybe I should think about getting redefining how I relate to all these people, because that's a lot of people that keep disrupting all of my plans and my productivity.
Well, and I think that's probably that's like the beginner level of a tortured relationship, and people might not even know that it's torture. Right. And I think
my kids torture me all the time.
I think this idea of
they wouldn't see it that way.
No, of course not. No, of course not. And children are the crazy makers we choose, right? We decided to have them, so
sometimes
we introduced crazy making into our lives. And through training, they can be less of a crazy maker.
True.
Right? Is there anything that we can do as parents to own how we are teaching them to treat us? That's the other thing, is as a parent, Man alive, I don't know when we got to this place where we thought our kids had to rule the roost and that we always have to be on their time and they're the ones who got to set the pace. But I think as parents, we need to give ourselves permission to recognize that training our children to behave the way that we need them to behave for us is an entirely appropriate parenting technique. Like, that's okay. You don't have to be at their beck and call. You don't have to assume that as soon as they have a need, you come running. I mean, need in quotations, right? More like a want usually. And so if you are a parent and your children are wild, out of control crazy makers, or they're just crazy making all the time, and you wouldn't put the labels of wild and out of control, but they are crazy makers, then a piece of it is, well, how do I train them out of that? Yeah. How do I use better parenting techniques to not make it so my child is constantly disrupting me and my ability to get things done or even to have a joyful experience? And then you take that to the adult relationships in your life. Like, we teach people how to treat us. So if we're constantly or having crazy makers into our world, what are we doing to invite them? How are we not training them to not be that for us? And sometimes it's because we're the crazy makers. We're crazy makers for others. And so a part of this idea of tortured relationships, it can go from the crazy making aspect of it all the way up to like really toxic relationships, really bad interactions, things that maybe we need to reevaluate whether or not these people should be in our lives or whether or not we should be in their lives because for some reason the dynamic isn't working out. Sometimes this is family and you can't just cut them out. Then the onus comes on us to figure out the relationship internally, how we're going to respond and show up in the relationship different. So every single thing on this list is actually about the inner work that we need to do that gets reflected in the outer world. So the relationships in our lives, it's, who do we invite in? Who do we allow to be there? And also sometimes we have to isn't also in quotes, but we feel like the ROI of having, say, family members, like they're not so toxic. It's not such a tortured relationship that we feel like we need to remove them from our lives. But they can still do a little bit of crazy making while they're there. Or maybe it's just the dynamic itself. It's not their fault. It's not our fault. It's just a dynamic that ended up becoming. And now what can we do as an individual to alter the dance? How do we change the choreography of the dance so that it's not so tortured? How do we maybe apologize to people we need to apologize to? And, suck it up. It's our ego. It's our pride. That's the problem. Or how do we approach people who maybe we feel have wronged us and we allowed them to continue to wrong us? And we just need to have an honest dialogue. Something that's, again, intellectually and emotionally honest, that owns what we need to own, that doesn't take a victim position, that doesn't make it so that the other person is totally in the wrong and we're totally in the right, meets them halfway, understands their position, but also the dialogue that needs to happen. And then for people that we simply can't have that kind of conversation with, how do we figure out a way to no longer have them as a part of our dynamic if they simply are somebody that we need to complete the relationship around? Or if they're family members and we don't want to complete the relationship, how do we create a really good amount of space between ourselves and them emotionally or psychologically? Because if the space is too close, then it never turns out well.
Well, you can also complete the relationship as it is and start a new one with a new redefinition of how you're going to engage. I mean, in some ways, that's way more complex than just ending things and walking away from somebody. It takes much more finesse, many more conversations, much more training and reinforcement over time to redefine that relationship. Anytime a kid grows up and goes away to college and then becomes an adult, there's always a redefinition between a child and parent that happens that's tough sometimes for both parties. And yet it's still a mature thing that is supposed to happen in our development and maturity. And so these redefinitions, we have a model for it as we grow up. We just have to take that same model and apply it to things beyond just our parents or our children. Apply it to friends and extended family too, or maybe even coworkers or people we work with or collaborate with. All of these things can come into play. And it really leads to the final point to help with all of this, which is knowing how and when to say no to protect productivity and joyfulness and all the things you want to do in life. Because everything, like you can't say yes to everything. And when you're saying no to things, you are saying yes to other things. When you say yes to things, you're saying no to things. So by saying no, you are also saying yes to something else. And I think we get our heads around this concept. I think we all need to probably say no a lot more. And no to ourselves as well. we talk a lot about saying no to other people. We've probably talked about a lot on this podcast, and you might even hear personal growth advice or other people talk about have good boundaries, have really solid boundaries where you can say no, you've got clear defined boundaries, and I think that's fantastic. But what about with yourself? This is where I struggle. I think we all struggle with this. What about ourselves and our own self boundaries? I said I wasn't going to just sit down tonight and binge watch that show for 5 hours straight. Am I going to honor what I've told myself, or do I have a boundary with myself, or am I going to go ahead and just be like, it doesn't matter. I'm going to cross my own boundaries. It's me anyway. Who's going to be hurt by that? Well, I'm hurt by that because I'm committed to myself, something I wasn't going to do or something I was going to do. And so these boundaries start with us first. Can we say no to ourselves? Because if we can't say no to ourselves, we certainly aren't going to be able to create boundaries and say no to anybody else, because ourself is the first point of reference we start with.
Yeah, I think that these last two pieces, really, this idea of the relationships we have in our life and the boundaries we set up, both of them reflect back to us usually work we need to do within ourselves. Like they're external. Again, it's fruitage. It's the fruit of the tree, and we're the tree. And our relationships oftentimes reflect the fruit of who we are. And so they tell us the work that we need to do. Sometimes we allow tortured relationships in our lives because acknowledging, number one, that they're tortured, and number two, that something needs to be done about it, leads invariably to step 3, which is reevaluate my own behavior in all of this. Figure out the things that I need to do to show up better, like the work that I need to be doing in order to alter this dance with this other person. And the same thing with boundaries. Oftentimes, saying no to something or setting a good boundary reflects back to us a lot of inner work that we need to do, work around permission and work around self-confidence and self-esteem, or this idea that we don't have any personal rights. Maybe you've just mentioned what I would put down to self-trust. I told myself I wasn't going to do this, and then I did. Well, if somebody told you they weren't going to do something and they did it anyway, or vice versa, you would stop trusting them and their word. So if we start setting good boundaries, we recognize that, we also have to do that for ourselves, and then now we have to build self-trust, especially if it's eroded by our inability to trust ourselves. So a lot of these things just come back to reflections back of the inner work that we need to be doing and how we're showing up in the world and how the world is responding to us based on all of that. And so really productivity starts with us doing the things we need to do. The fruit is of the tree, and we're the tree. So what is the pruning work we need to be doing in order to be the healthiest tree possible? And at the end of that tweet, the person said, self-audit, fix one thing at a time. And this makes me think of that article that I read about mindfulness, not for a handful of people, not decreasing their anxiety. And the reason why is because their emotional, the emotional stuff they hadn't processed now comes flooding in, because now it feels like it has space to do so. And so even though mindfulness, ultimately, if a person completes the process, they start out mindful, the emotional work that comes up for them now is obvious. It gets addressed. It gets processed. On the other side of that, it absolutely increases their inner peace and their peace of mind and lessens their anxiety, because they are now addressing the thing that probably was robbing them of their peace of mind to begin with. Now they're just looking at it head on. Now it's not something that they can put in the shadows anymore. They have to process it. This is sort of this list, and everything that goes along with it is basically the same thing when it comes to productivity or fruitage. Initially, this will feel like the antithesis of productivity. This is very counterintuitive. If before you're truly productive or truly can get the fruitage you want, you have to address all of these things. You have to now address the system of your health and how you treat your body and whether or not you have body-mind practices, and addressing your chemistry, which might be a really big hill to climb. There might have a lot of stuff in front of it. Maybe decades of poor habits, like your parents didn't give you good habits, and so now you're fighting all of this wiring from childhood. Maybe you're fighting all of this self-judgment and self-criticism. Maybe it's just really hard to do all of this stuff because the way that you're wired at this point and the way the system is set up is it fights every single good habit from being established. I mean, we're talking about literally years worth of work to do. If you're talking about this idea of setting up the right environment, Maybe you don't have the space to set up the right environment yet. Maybe you're waiting for kids to grow up a little bit, or maybe you're waiting for, enough money to be able to move because that's the thing that you've been wanting to do, or whatever it is. And that could also represent years worth of, addressing a situation. The same thing with relationships. Sometimes it takes years to heal a relationship, and sometimes it takes years to establish good boundaries because of the level of self-awareness that comes along with it. And it's not like you stop all productivity through all of this, and you still have to be living your life, and you still have to be being a responsible adult. And so this is no small thing. This list of 4 is literally years worth of work looking you in the face. And if you take it on, if you do it, on the other side is ridiculous amounts of productivity, ridiculous amounts of achievement, tons of really positive, healthy fruitage. Now, I don't want to be discouraging and say, well, it's going to take years, because it's kind of like, I think I read another article that was talking about how if a person is used to eating fast food, every day for lunch, they eat a hamburger every day for lunch. Just changing 2 of those meals to a sandwich, to like a homemade sandwich, can sometimes have an effect on their health that they can immediately feel, which I thought was fascinating. Just altering your diet just a little bit, just little tiny habits can have results that you can start feeling. So the quote unquote completion, or maybe the hitting the law of diminishing returns, that might be years in the making. But just making these small calibrative changes now will start to have an impact. You'll start to feel these things, even if it's just little. You just go, oh man, like I lost about 10 pounds a year or so ago. And I am astonished. Now, I'm not very tall, so 10 pounds is a lot for me. I'm 5'2", so 10 pounds is significant. The shorter you are, the more significant that number is. And I am still sometimes surprised by how big of a deal it was for me. Like just that 10 pounds, how much it changed, how much better I feel in general, how much more mobile I feel, how much more permission I give myself to do things, how much better I feel in just terms of like shallowness and vanity, like how much I feel about my body. So little changes can have a big impact, and they can be very empowering and very encouraging to go on to move on to the next thing. That's basically what personal development is, though. Those of us who get, addicted to personal growth, it's because we get addicted to these changes. We get addicted to how they make us feel. And so I think that when it comes to all of this, initially it feels like it's antithetical to productivity, antithetical to these things. But that's because it's all this work that maybe needed to be addressed is now becoming really obvious. And then once you start addressing it, once you start processing the emotions, doing these little changes in your health and your brain chemistry, improving the relationships, setting positive boundaries, just the little things, they're enough to keep the flywheel spinning of going forward.
I think a lot of these challenges to productivity come down to aimlessness in our lives. I think that people that struggle with productivity usually don't know where they're headed. That's usually the core of it. And so I can give you a personal framework of how I take what we've talked about today and I put it to my life. I look at these 4 parts as the dashboard of a vehicle I'm driving, or some vessel that I'm piloting. But I'm still the pilot, and I'm still going somewhere. And where I'm going influences how much I pay attention to those instruments in the vehicle I'm driving, metaphorically, and how I attend to them. And I think the work we're talking about, or focusing on these areas, comes into sharp focus when you have a destination and you have an aim for where you're headed in life. It's a trim tab. It's a shortcut. Because otherwise, you're just refining these things with a big question mark. To what end? I guess I'm feeling a little happier. My body and mind connection, my ergonomic workspace. Like, you can improve the quality day-to-day process of your life, the day-to-day experience, but also why? Why are you improving that? What are you after? What is the point of where you're traveling in life? And I think that's a quick trim tab to get to the heart of all of these things as you determine what is it that you're after. It's kind of like that experience I think we all have right before we're ready to go on holiday or vacation, and we are going to be gone for a week or two. We scramble and we close a bunch of loops. It's like the most productive week of your year, the week before you leave for vacation or holiday. it's productive in a couple ways. First of all, you close a bunch of loops on stuff you've been pushing back and delaying for a long time. And then you just take stuff off your list that didn't really matter. You're like, yeah, that doesn't matter. I can do it way in the future, maybe never. I'll just remove it. Or you just close the loop in a quick way because you have an aim. You have a goal. You're going on vacation or holiday. You're going to go somewhere and do something fun that's restorative, hopefully, that's fun and engaging for you. So you're excited. You have a purpose to why you're working hard this week. And it brings it into sharp focus. Now, it's not sustainable to live every day like you're going on vacation tomorrow, because we do fudge the numbers, quote unquote, a little bit before we leave for holiday or vacation, because we know we can pick it up 2 weeks from now and finish it up when we get back. But just the same idea of being on purpose or having an aim that we're going toward, it doesn't even have to be a life purpose. Just going on vacation, that's not a life purpose, but it certainly brings a lot of things into sharp focus for you around productivity. So just taking that idea and connecting it in a bigger way, I think can bring all of these things into alignment to go, okay, I need to work on this, work on this, work on this. And it's more joyful because it's serving some greater goal or purpose of direction in your life. And then it's not so traumatic or mundane. You're going through the hardship or the tough stuff in these areas to be productive for a reason, for something that you want. So getting really clear on what you desire and what you want, thinking about that and having that locked into your mind. And I'm not just talking about goals. I'm talking about what you want in life, like the kind of life you want, getting really clear on what does that look like. I think that's a shortcut, or not a shortcut, but it's definitely a lens that you can see all of this through that I think will help you.
Yeah, what did they say? Don't live your life as if you're going to die tomorrow. Live your life as if you're going on vacation tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's what it comes down to is, and I totally agree. I think that's a fantastic point. I hadn't considered that until you started talking about it. But I do feel like when I know what it is I'm heading toward, I have a lot more ambition to address all of these individual elements that ultimately, are part of my productivity. But again, as Fruitage, I think one of the big changes that I made is that I stopped thinking about things in terms, it's like, don't think about it in terms of destination, think about it in terms of journey. In terms of productivity, don't think about it in terms of like output, think about it in terms of process. And I think we've talked about process a lot in the podcast. Refining my processes will in and of itself give me ambition and inspiration. It's like, how do I make this better? And how do I, but that's also how I'm wired. I'm an introverted thinking user, an accuracy user. And I think TPs, those of us that are TPs are very much focused on optimized performance. So if that's the thing that I really feel is motivating to me, then that's the thing I should be focused on. I should be focused on my processes and optimizing my performance however I can.
Absolutely.
And knowing that about yourself, I think is really helpful. What is the thing that lights you up, right? Is it relationships? Is it greater understanding of self? Is it getting a job done and getting your goals accomplished? Is it optimizing your performance and making your processes better? Knowing that about yourself and then just giving yourself permission to hone in on that, I think is a big one too, to motivate us to even address all of these things, because it can feel like a lot. It can feel almost demoralizing. But once you get into them and you start to feel these little subtle changes, having purpose, which makes it so that it doesn't feel overwhelming, it feels necessary. I think that those were all really good points.
It doesn't have to be a grand purpose, like a life purpose. I mean, that's also good, but it could be it could be an aim, something you're aiming toward. Just helps, right? Just bring all of this together for you, and it could be a small aim, a small goal. Getting through college, it could be a small aim, or getting to college. I mean, these are basic things. It doesn't have to be like, I'm going to be this X in my life, this ultimate thing. It doesn't have to be that big or that severe. It could be a small step along the process. Just something you're aiming at brings it all to focus. So what do you think? You've been listening along. You haven't had a microphone, though. It's just been me and Antonia talking, but now is your chance to make your voice heard. Come over to personalityhacker.com directly below this episode. Leave a comment, ask a question, or more importantly, share your personal story with productivity. What has worked for you? What have you tried that we even suggested here? It didn't work for you, but you found something else that did. You'd love to share that with us and the community at large so we can all learn from your wisdom and your experience. Again, come over to personalityhacker.com and make your voice heard.
And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave a rating and review for us on iTunes, that helps us out a lot. We have a book. It's called Personality Hacker. You can get it at all major book retailers. And if you leave us a rating and review on Amazon or on Goodreads, that also helps us out a lot. And of course, we have a suite of programs that are personal growth oriented through the lens of personality types. So if that is interesting to you and you would like to invest in yourself and in us, head over to personalityhacker.com and look at our catalog of programs that are designed for you.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast. If you're focused on personal growth, I think you'll resonate with our core content over at personalityhacker.com. We want to see you understand how your mind is wired so you can generate motivation, improve social skills, find career opportunities, and master excellent decision making. But a quick warning, we are advice and action focused in all of our articles, podcasts, and videos. This means that we attract people who like to be challenged to become excellent, to take action, to put in the work to optimize themselves, not simply just gather more information. If you are committed to personal growth and ready to radically find your inner truth, then come over and be a part of our growing community of like minds at Personality Hacker.